Good day, and welcome to the QEM Heroes webinar series. I'm Christine Wood, and I serve as the Assistant Program Director for the Heroes Fellows Program at QEM. And for more than 30 years, QEM has been a national catalyst for STEM education transformation and research capacity building. Currently, the QEM network serves nearly 900 colleges and universities and reaches more than 8,000 individuals nationwide. This webinar is part of the HEROES initiative. The HEROES program brings together researchers with experience in the federal government to lend their expertise and support to the STEM research and education communities. Our fellows are here to provide tools and tips for navigating the funding landscape, developing STEM programs and partnerships, and improving talent retention in in-demand fields. We hope this series promotes engagement with our HEROES fellows and provides valuable resources to our participants. The webinar recordings and slides will be available in the QEM Resource Hub. By attending this webinar, you will soon be added to the QEM network and granted access to the Resource Hub. And I'm so happy to introduce our group of four presenters today. Dr. Toni Danstep uses her PhD in systems science and developmental psychology to advance equitable, informal STEM learning research and practice. Toni has led over 100 research and evaluation studies in collaboration with brilliant practitioners, academics, artists, and community members. Her work has explored the impacts of informal learning for people of all ages and has spanned topics including social justice, metacognition, spatial reasoning, and environmental and social science. With deep applied research methods and design expertise, Toni has experience as a primary investigator and lead researcher, an evaluation consultant, and a program officer for STEM education funding programs. Dr. Toya Jones-Frank is a mathematics educator, researcher, and STEM education leader with a passion for creating just and equitable learning opportunities. She recently served as a program director at the National Science Foundation, where she led national initiatives in racial equity in STEM education and data science core. She also served at George Mason University as an associate professor of mathematics education leadership and secondary education. Beyond her scholarship, she collaborates with teachers, leaders, and mathematicians across the U.S. and abroad. She is especially proud of her roots as a high school math teacher, mathematics department chair, and consultant for partners, including DC Public Schools. Dr. Naomi Hall Byers is a social psychologist whose work examines social, cultural, and contextual factors that drive health and educational inequities among historically marginalized groups. For 16 years, she was a professor of psychological sciences at Winston-Salem State University, where she directed the Race, Culture, and Context Lab. She previously served as a program director and acting deputy division director in the Social and Economic Sciences Division of the Directorate for Social Behavior and Economic Sciences at the National Science Foundation. Dr. Hall Byers holds a PhD in applied social psychology and an MPH in maternal and child health, with expertise in social and behavioral sciences, mixed methods, and evaluation. Dr. Tori Rolak Smith is an engineer and educator whose career includes roles as a faculty member, researcher, administrator, and program director in higher education and government. She led teaching and learning, curriculum, advising, research, recruitment, and corporate engagement initiatives in her 14 years at Howard University. Tori also worked for 8 years at the National Science Foundation, serving as lead program director for the Eddie Bernice Johnson Includes Initiative and program director for the Historically Black Colleges and Universities undergraduate program and the Faculty Early Career Development program. She views her work, past, present, and future, as the convergence of professional expertise, lived experience, and enduring commitment to identifying, implementing, and studying innovation and participation in STEM education and careers. So, without further ado, I will turn the floor over to our participants.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much, Christine and Trina, for setting this up today. And thank you, everybody, for being here. We are excited to think with you about the ways that we can clearly align our research design and methodology to support a research study and answer our specific research questions. So today's webinar is part of a broader series focused on building capacity for applied STEM education and behavioral sciences research. And we hope you will spend time with our past sessions on the QEM Resource Hub if you weren't with us live, and that you'll join us for future sessions, which we'll share all of those at the end of today's webinar. Of course, our sessions have broader application, but we wanted to be clear about the expertise and lenses we are bringing. We are all former National Science Foundation program officers, and we also want to be very clear that we are not speaking on behalf of the agency. However, we will be bringing our experience of reviewing a wide variety of research design ideas to our topic today. Today's webinar will highlight why it is essential to select the right research design and methodology to support your study. We'll start by providing a brief overview of the research process and crafting strong research questions, and then spend the bulk of our time discussing alignment of research design and methodology and the implications, including implications for misalignment. So we're going to do a test here, see if this works. We want to get a sense of who is in the room. So we want to ask each of you to place your experience on this grid. You can't do it quite yet, but hold it in your head. From left to right, this is how comfortable you are, how deep your research design and methodology experience is. And then from bottom to top, this is the number of research designs and methodologies you have experience with. So kind of the breadth of experience. I'm going to walk you through how to do this. So you should be able to, well, I'll first say, I'm going to share the steps, but if at any point you get frustrated or it isn't working, please feel free to just share your quadrant in the chat, upper right, lower right, etc. Okay, so in order to do this, in Zoom, if you go up to the top of your the Zoom screen, you should be able to find your tab, the name with your tab, and select the 3 dots next to that. And then a drop-down menu will come down, select animate. A bar should pop up to the left, and you'll be able to click the stamp button, which is that check mark, choose your stamp, and we'll give it a practice away here. If you are able to do it, you should be able to head into the stamp practice area. But I'm not seeing any, so this isn't looking good. But I do see your chats. All right. I'm going to give it one more second. If you're able to do it. And then we'll go to a backup poll, which we have prepared. All right. Thanks for trying.
Tony, I think they're all looking for their names. We see your name at the top. If they click on the 3 dots by your name, that should
by my name.
Yeah, by your name when we looking at the screen.
Okay. So if you click on my name and the 3 dots to the right, does that and go down to Ann and Tate? Over to the left, there's a pop-up, check mark, check mark. It's not giving you. Okay. Thank you.
It actually worked for me. I put my check mark, so you should see me.
Oh, I'm not seeing it. Well, we tried. Thank you for trying, everybody. Let's go. Oh, here they are. They're showing up. All right. I know I have a different view. We tried so many, we tested it. We really did test it. Okay. So we have some folks. It might only be to presenters only. All right. I think we should go back up. I think we should do the poll. Given what I'm seeing in the chat from people who are presenting.
I will launch the poll.
Thanks for giving it a try, folks.
I'll give participants a few more seconds.
Perfect. Thank you. Oh, perfect. Ooh. The poll is dancing for me, which is fascinating, blinking on and off, but I have a tiny view. Okay, so it looks like this is a great breadth, perfect for this webinar. We have about 15% who are new to research designs and methodologies, and about half of you who are really getting growing comfort with research designs and methodologies. This is like perfect set. And then some folks who are comfortable with a broad set of research designs and methodologies. So I think this will be a really fun webinar for everyone. Thank you. And I'll go ahead and move us to the next slide. If it will let me. Here we go. Okay, so we really briefly wanted to situate today's discussion in the research process. We want to highlight that before you even begin, the people you work with are really essential to building your capacity and doing good research. And we covered building research capacity through collaboration in the March webinar. So the first essential step is kind of this top row. First essential step in designing and conducting good research is really grounding in the work that has come before your work. So the prior literature really helped you find out what are the larger areas of inquiry or your research agenda to focus on, and know what questions are necessary to advance the field. And we covered the process of using literature to develop strong research questions in the April webinar. So today we're focusing kind of on that middle set, choosing and aligning our research designs and methods to strengthen our research and ensure that we're able to answer our questions and make it easier to communicate about the work and share our rationale for the work. And this is another moment where it's really essential to think about if we need additional collaborators, because this is really the step that sets up to ensure that all the work, the time, the money that we, our collaborators, our participants, our funders put into the next three steps are worthwhile. So this is a really essential component of the research design process. So I'll pass it to Toya, who will bring us back into designing strong research questions and hypotheses.
Thank you so much. So in some earlier presentations in this series, and yes, I see a question there about viewing prior webinars. Thanks, Christine. She's responding. Yes, visit us in the QEM Hub for earlier presentations from us and other members of the QEM Heroes Fellows. So we've talked about how research questions play a foundational role in research studies alongside problem statements. We talked about having good bounded problem statements informing research questions. So essentially research questions define like the intellectual terrain that the research is going to cover. So keep that framing in mind as we talk about hypotheses today. And hypotheses are related to, but a bit different from research questions, and you can have either or both in a study. So the table on this slide captures some general distinctions, but the most useful way I found to hold the difference between these two is that research questions are about understanding, while hypotheses are about prediction, predicting. So research questions open up inquiry. They signal that researchers are seeking to explore, to describe, to understand or explain a phenomenon. Hypotheses, I see those as going a step further. So they propose specific testable relationships between variables, and then we anticipate that and then we meaning the researcher will anticipate what evidence is going to show related to those testable relationships we defined. So it's worth noting that research questions are not exclusive to any one methodological tradition. Both qualitative and quantitative studies, as well as mixed methods designs, are organized around research questions. However, what differs is what comes next. In quantitative research, especially, it's common and it's often expected that accompanying the research question, there will be aligned hypotheses. So research questions and hypotheses really work in tandem. The questions frame the inquiry while the hypothesis sharpens those questions into testable claims. And this is an important distinction in the process of research design. Research questions are often crafted earlier, and they often evolve as researchers deepen their engagement with the literature and in the research process. Hypotheses, by contrast, tend to be finalized later. They require theoretical and empirical grounding to make defensible predictions. So knowing when each is done is a part of developing your identity as a researcher. And so here on the slide, you see there are two examples, and we have chosen to use virtual reality as our example scenario or research space for this particular presentation. So you see there the research question asks an exploration question, or it inquires, how does the use of virtual reality tools affect students' academic performance compared to traditional teaching methods? While the hypothesis uh, states this testable type of prediction. Students who use virtual reality tools will demonstrate significantly higher academic performance than students who receive traditional teaching methods. Next slide, please. So notice that both strong research questions and strong hypotheses are committed to precision and purpose. They express that commitment differently. So a strong research question should be clear and focused. So a reader should understand immediately what's being investigated and why it matters. Vague and overly broad questions diffuse the study before it begins. And in earlier, I believe it was February presentation, we talked about problems of the field versus problems that are tractable in terms of research questions. Equally important is that the question be researchable. So it needs to be answerable through systematic inquiry and not simply a matter of anecdote or opinion or values. And research questions take time and resources. So the question must be significant. It must be worth asking, worth answering, and worth reading. And a strong research question should be complex enough to require analysis. If it can simply be answered by yes or no or a quick search, then it isn't doing enough intellectual research to be a strong research question. On the other hand, strong hypotheses carry some of that same DNA, but they have a different layer of precision. A hypothesis needs to be specific and measurable. So you should be able to name the variables and the anticipated relationship between those variables, and it should be concrete enough to test. A hypothesis must also be falsifiable, meaning that it has to be written in a way that evidence could either support or contradict it. So, if no imaginable finding could prove your hypothesis wrong, then it isn't a true hypothesis. Researchers must be genuinely open to being wrong when you propose a hypothesis. Strong hypotheses are also, as I mentioned on the previous slide, grounded in literature. So they emerge from what's already known and not solely from intuition. And this is what makes them predictive in a defensible way. Researchers aren't just guessing, they're extending a line of reasoning built on and grounded in literature. And so, a useful way to think about these two in tandem is to think how research questions tell us what we're looking for, and hypotheses can tell us what to expect or what to find. And both of them demand that the researcher do intellectual work up front before you collect any data. Next slide, please. So when introducing research design, I like to think of it using a blueprint metaphor for the study. So just like architects need blueprints before they construct a building, researchers need a design before they start to collect data. So the research design provides a structure for how the study will answer the questions and or test the hypotheses. And you see there are some things to consider on the previous slide as you uh, build your blueprint. So for instance, how it will be collected, who's being selected, how they're examined, and how the research questions will be answered. Next slide, please. So one of the most important ideas here is alignment. So the type of research question that you ask should influence the kind of design that you choose. For example, if your question is trying to understand people's experiences, perceptions, or meanings, then a qualitative design may be more appropriate. On the other hand, if your goal is to measure effects or compare groups or test relationships between variables, then a quantitative design may make more sense. And I also would like to emphasize, and there will be more discussion on this later, that there are many different research designs, especially in STEM education and behavioral science research. Rather than trying to memorize dozens of designs, it's often more useful to group them in large categories based on purpose, and also to keep some flexibility between and among the different categories. Some studies are descriptive and they aim to sort of do this lay of the land type of work, where others are exploratory and they help researchers to gain some grounds in a new area. Experimental and quasi-experimental designs focus on testing effects and relationships, and longitudinal studies examine change over time, while case studies provide deep insight into a particular context or bounded phenomenon. The key takeaway from this is that research design should always serve the purpose of the study, and it should align logically with the research question being posed. Next slide, please. So when selecting a research design, we as researchers are making theoretical and practical decisions often simultaneously. One of the most important considerations is thinking about alignment. We want to think about alignment between research questions and the design, as noted earlier. And the design should support the kind of evidence that's needed to answer the questions being posed. I also emphasize that participant characteristics matter tremendously. So looking at selecting a research design, these are some of the considerations. And one of them is participant population or characteristics. The population that you're studying can limit or shape the methods that you can realistically use. I work a lot in STEM education, so I think about research involving children, or working with vulnerable populations, or hard to access communities. Those often require different approaches than working with studies where adults volunteer to do work or to participate in a study in like a control setting. So resources are also another major factor when selecting a research design. Sometimes researchers design studies that sound excellent, but they're impossible given available funding, uh, staffing and expertise, technology, or even time. So a strong design has to be rigorous, but you'll hear us use this word in this presentation and in previous ones. Research designs have to be feasible based on the research, based on the resources that you have. And something that can never get too much attention from me is ethics and time constraints. So I see these as very important and critical aspects of research design. So we as researchers have an obligation to protect participants and to conduct studies responsibly and ethically. At the same time, we're also juggling practical limitations like semester timelines, grant periods and timelines, and school schedules for participants. And those things often shape what's realistic. So the goal is to find a design that's going to be both rigorous, but it is also feasible and also ethical and responsible toward those participating in the study. And now I am going to turn it over to Dr. Hall Byers to talk a little bit about selecting methodology.
Thank you. So one of the things that you will note is that different research designs necessitate distinct methodological approaches, right? So Toya has already mentioned that. And what you'll see to the left are the things that are the factors that she has already mentioned in terms of being important in selecting a research design. And we want to bring this home to say these things are also important in selecting the methodology that aligns with your research design. So these are some things to think about. So when we think about alignment, which you're going to hear us talk a lot about, it refers to the logical progression of ideas between the structural elements of your study and ensures that each phase is connected and justified. So it should always align with your methodology should always align with your research questions, your aims, or your objectives. So does the methodology answer the research question or support the hypotheses? Feasibility is always important to assess. Do you have access? So Toya talked about different populations. Do you have access to those populations? Can you get the sample size needed? So for instance, when we're thinking about quantitative research, right? So if you do a power analysis ahead of time, can you recruit the sample size needed to effectively execute a particular methodology? Or if you're thinking about qualitative research, which does not require the same number of participants, but do you have the time and the access to do the interviews or to do focus groups with this particular population? So you want to make sure when you select a methodology to align with your design, that you have access to the population, you have access to technology. Technology may be more important when you think about qualitative or mixed method, right? Because transcripts need to be transcribed, right? Now, we know we have data tools now that can help us with that, but, they still have to be transcribed. They still have to be read over, for clarity and so forth. Or do you have any of the other tools? So if quantitative, do you have access to the data analysis software that you would need for that particular study? As we talk about literature, we previously did a webinar in this series about the importance of reviewing literature and grounding your study in literature. So are you adding to previous studies using similar methodologies, or are you being complementary to those particular studies? So, in thinking about time frame, so the question might be, how much time do you have, right? Do you have finite timelines to collect data? If you only have 6 months to collect data, you may not necessarily think about qualitative or mixed method as a methodology, because those things often take more time unless you have the expertise to be able to do that. And we're going to talk about that in a moment. But can you complete the study in the allotted time frame with this methodology? And I can tell you, as a former program officer, we have all talked about this, where a PI will propose a study or a methodology in a particular time frame, and having expertise in that area, sometimes it becomes very obvious that maybe they don't have that expertise, because it would take more time than they are allotting themselves to actually complete this particular methodology or study. Toya talked a lot about ethics, right? So are you researching within a vulnerable population? Are you researching a sensitive topic? If so, are you selecting a methodology that will give you the information you need, but also protect privacy and consent information from the participants? So ethical considerations in methodology are not just moral obligations, like they should be integral to ensuring that research is valid, credible, and beneficial. And so we must protect participants while upholding the scientific integrity of our work. And then expertise. It's important to have expertise to carry out whichever methodology is selected, but it's also important to think about mutually beneficial partnerships and collaborations with other researchers, but especially methodologists. I think oftentimes we think about scientific expertise in partnerships or collaborations and not necessarily methodological expertise. But methodologists can help you plan every stage of your research while providing expertise in theory, a diverse range of methodology, sampling techniques, and analyses. And so methodology in combination with the design constitute the blueprint for your particular study. So as we talk about common research methodologies, right? So, first you have to acknowledge that there are assumptions and perspectives that fundamentally shape and influence how people choose their methodologies. So I'm going to talk about the three main methodologies. So we have quantitative, which is, more of a positivist paradigm. So it assumes an objective kind of measured reality. It tends to be structured, relies on statistical analysis, so things that can be measured and quantified through, the operationalization of variables. It tends to be replicable or generalizable beyond your immediate sample, and often focused on breadth or larger samples. So on the other side, we have qualitative. And I know that there are some people who don't believe that qualitative, and I guess by default, mixed methodologies are scientific, but I think it's a fundamental misunderstanding of the purpose, the goals, and the rigor that goes into qualitative studies. So these methodologies often operate under more of a constructivist or interpretivist, there we go, paradigm that really accepts reality as socially constructed and it's context dependent. And so context is important. It focuses on the why and the how. It can be fairly flexible in approach, but in some instances may also be semi-structured. And even if you think about in clinical settings where it tends to be extremely structured in terms of interviews, utilize thematic analysis, focus on meaning making and not necessarily generalizability because there tends to be smaller samples, and focuses on depth and understanding. And rigor does not necessarily come from the sample sizes, but it comes from how well the approach is implemented and supported by methodological, ethical, and reflective practices. And so in the middle, we have mixed methods, right? Which is an integrated approach that combines the strengths from both quantitative and qualitative into either a single study or across multiple related studies. It uses triangulation, which involves the combining of different approaches to study a particular, phenomenon. But it also, triangulation increases the trustworthiness and the rigor of the research by supporting or collaborating the findings from various methods or data sources. Now, we are not going to talk about right now the different types of triangulation or going to in depth about mixed methods because we actually are hosting a 2-part webinar in July and August focused exclusively on mixed method research design and analysis. And at that time, we'll go into more detail about why a researcher might choose to use more than one method. We're going to walk through some real world applications of the major types of mixed methodologies and address data collection and analysis. But here I just want to note that for the purposes of triangulation and thinking about it, there's not just one type of triangulation. There's methodological, there's data, theoretical, and investigator triangulation that all can bring, like I said, the best of both worlds together. And so the dual approach of mixed methods allows a much richer, more nuanced, and comprehensive understanding of a phenomenon. So here, common design and methodology options. Some may see methodology as, or some of in the category, you may see it as a design, where others may see it more as a methodology. That can be more discipline specific, so we're not necessarily here to argue which is which, but we just want to talk a little bit more about the designs. And so I'm going to build a little bit on what Toya has already introduced. So we have the main categories of designs on the left, And in the middle, we have methodologies that generally align with these designs. And so one of the things that I think is important to note is that you see for just about all of the designs, all three common methodologies can be utilized. We see something a little bit different with experimental designs, but there's also conversation about qualitative and mixed methodologies being used with experimental designs as well. But I'm just going to briefly go over some examples, but keep in mind this list to the right under examples is not exhaustive by any means. And I'll just give you a quick example. Surveys can be utilized in all of the design. So please don't take this table as prescriptive. So we talked about descriptive designs as kind of the lay of the land. Cross-sectional, longitudinal, observational methodologies, surveys, case studies. We see with exploratory designs where we're looking for emerging information or an area that's under-researched. We can use interviews, so you can do one-on-one. You can do focus groups, which are group interviews, secondary data analysis, and ethnography, right, which is a very prominent qualitative methodology. Experimental designs, we're often looking at randomized controlled trials, and in many of the sort of scientific realms, the RCTs are considered the gold standard in research. We're looking at quasi-experimental designs, and quasi-experimental is essentially experimental design without random assignment. So it's looking at causal and impact without random assignment. And so you see there, you could be pre and post studies, post-test only, time series, longitudinal designs. You can have repeated measures, retrospective studies, and case study designs. We're looking at single case, multiple case. You can have observations, surveys. You can have document and content analysis. So really, this table is just to show that there is no limit on the number of different types of studies and tools and methodologies that you can use for the design. The key is just making sure that there is good alignment. So before I turn it over, I do want to talk about emerging research methodologies. You might be familiar with these methodologies, but we wanted to briefly mention three. Two are quantitative, one is qualitative, that can be used in STEM education and behavioral science research. So the first two are quantitative, and we're looking at critical quantitative research. If you're not familiar with that, it's a methodological approach that emphasizes equity, social justice, and a deeper explanation of how data is collected, interpreted, and used. Excuse me. And so it really highlights the importance of context, particularly among marginalized populations. But it integrates critical theory with quantitative methods to analyze data. And so one of the links that we have in the resource slide is to the Institute in Critical Quantitative Computational and Mixed Methodologies. If you're interested in this particular methodology or want to read more, there's lots of information on that particular website. So I want to send you to that site to take a look. And then computational social sciences. So this is a field and a methodology. And really what it does is it uses algorithms and big data analytics to study human behavior. So it involves using computers to model, to simulate, and to analyze social interactions and behavior. So the field kind of integrates data science approaches, such as like machine learning and network analysis, with traditional social science methods to investigate social and behavioral relationships. So I also provided a link in the resources slide there's a special issue on computational social science in the Journal of Nature Computational Science that you can take a look. And finally, digital ethnography can also be known as netnography, and is an adaptation of traditional ethnographic research methodology, but it studies communities, cultures, and interactions primarily in digital spaces. So it investigates how people communicate, form identities, and then create communities in technologically mediated environments. There's also a link in the resource slide to a reading in JSTOR Daily that introduces ethnography theory and practice. So in the next slide, I'm just gonna quickly keeping with the virtual reality sort of theme. So if you have the topic, the use of virtual reality tools in university classrooms, we just wanna, we're gonna begin a little more focus on alignment, but this is just a simple example to show how you can take one topic and you can ask 3 different types of research questions and that can align, and then you align your methodology with those. So for the quantitative, we're asking, how does the use of virtual reality tools affect students' academic performance compared to traditional teaching methods? For the qualitative question, we can ask, how do students perceive the use of virtual reality tools to enhance learning experiences in the classroom? And then if we combine them or look at an integrated approach with a mixed methods question, we might be looking at how does the use of virtual reality in the classroom influence student outcomes and contribute to their overall learning experiences in the classroom? So with alignment, we thought that it would be helpful to just go over an example of alignment all the way from research question to results or findings. We've been consistent in using the example of virtual reality in the classroom. So we're just going to look at a quantitative example for the topic. So on the left side, and you'll be able to view these when we finish the webinar, when you get access to the slides, you'll see this is the through line of a research study. So we have the research questions, the hypotheses, the methodology and the research design, data collection, data analysis, results, and conclusion. And so when aligned, each element flows logically to the next, creating a strong, coherent, and trustworthy study. And so for the interest of time, I'm not going to go over everything to the right, but you can take a look at it when you download the slides. But at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Tori to talk a little bit more in depth about alignment and to close out our webinar by summarizing some of the things that we've talked about today.
Thank you. So as we begin to bring today's webinar to a close, we just want to remind you again and again, you'll hear it as a theme throughout the presentation, that alignment really is essential. And alignment matters because it ensures that each stage of a study really is connected logically and that those components are mutually supportive. Alignment also enhances the validity and reliability of your study findings. So it is important to know that there are different research designs, and you've heard about many of those today, but those different designs really necessitate distinct methodological approaches. And that's going to depend, of course, on the research question or questions that you are addressing. So depending on your field and background, not every researcher is going to understand all of the nuances of different methodologies. I can speak personally as an engineer who lived almost entirely in the quantitative space, that my methods were quantitative. And prior to developing an interest in education research, I knew nothing about qualitative methodology really. But having been trained to do it, I now understand and want to make sure we convey that you don't have to be an expert in every methodological approach. You should understand something about the methods that you're proposing to use, but it is absolutely essential, really, that you engage a methodologist as part of your research team who can help, as my co-presenters have said, actually, I think everyone has said prior to me, that methodologists are key in helping you design your study in a way so that you can have this very clear through line that allows you to avoid some common mistakes that we'll talk about in just a moment. Because understanding different methodologies is what equips researchers with the tools necessary to design and conduct rigorous and relevant studies in their respective fields. So we want you to engage methodologists for those reasons. And just know that there are resources that provide primers on research methods that are geared toward faculty who haven't previously conducted education research. One such example is in the resources page. It is a link to the kinds of tools that can help provide you with an idea of how to approach alignment. But certainly these kinds of primers and training courses don't replace the expertise of a methodologist. So you'll see an example from the engineering education context there on the resources page. It's geared toward engineering faculty who conducted engineering research, but were then looking to engage in engineering education research. And so it highlights different methodological approaches that might not be typical to those of you who, like me, were engineers and lived entirely in a quantitative space. So it helps to acclimate you, but again, doesn't replace the necessity of a methodologist. So as you think about alignment, on the next slide, we'll show you an example of an alignment matrix, which is a recommended tool to help plan for what that clear through line can look like. So from the research question to the data collection plan to the analysis plan and how you're even going to interpret your findings or results, depending on the type of study you're conducting, this is a tool that can be incredibly effective. It's really borrowed from evaluation practice, but it helps with both alignment and communication. Now, there are different versions available from a number of different resources, but one that Tony identified is linked in the resource page at the end of this presentation. So you'll have access to that at the conclusion of the webinar once you have access to the hub. I do want to note that in my experience as a program director, formerly with the National Science Foundation, your more competitive proposals really included this type of information, even in the proposal. It wasn't necessarily always in a table, but it was a very clear presentation of these elements of a proposed study. So these kinds of tables, alignment matrices, can be a good tool for planning. It can be a great tool to actually include in your proposal. And then it's really a good opportunity to help guide post-award research team meetings. I think it was Toya who mentioned that she used things like this with her research team post-award. So it's really a useful tool in a variety of possible applications. So we've talked a bit about alignment. Let's shift now to exploring misalignment and some of the things that can happen should there be misalignment, which we absolutely want to ensure that you avoid. So first of all, misalignment can lead to unaddressed research claims. For example, if your research question is about exploring, if you use the word that we're going to explore a certain topic, but you include no qualitative data, that would raise a red flag. Usually, quantitative studies are measuring. You might hear measure versus explore. So if you say that you're going to explore and you haven't engaged methods that will help you explore, then you're going to end up with unaddressed research aims or questions. Similarly, if you say you're going to measure and you don't have any methods that allow you to take measurements that speak to the question that you've established, you'll have unaddressed research aims. And I realize how elementary this might sound, but you wouldn't believe how many proposals come in with research questions that there are methods not designed to address. So we just want to alert you to that. Similarly, when data collection and analysis plans are misaligned, or when methods aren't appropriate for the questions proposed, then the study really is flawed. And reviewers will know proposals will get declined, papers will be rejected, and a common reason for that is citing weak methodology. If you've ever seen that, certainly not for your own submissions, but maybe for that of a colleague, you'll know that kind of weak methodology is suggesting a lack of alignment. So researchers in the field will also know, and it can lead to the credibility of the PI or the research team coming into question. There's also the issue of overstated claims. And I like to categorize this as kind of going with what you know versus going with what you need. So going with the research methods you know isn't always best, because I hope we've established the point that it really needs to depend on the research questions you're trying to address. You don't want to try to fit the method you know into a study if it's not the best approach. Not that I know that from personal experience with quantitative moving into the qualitative world, but you really want to take the time to engage a methodologist and go with what you need for the study you propose, because the wrong approach can cause a researcher to overstate claims and misinterpret findings, which can lead to undermined integrity of research findings and really the study as a whole. So the key here is just to understand that misalignment between design and approach can yield significant negative consequences that we really want you to avoid. And the cartoon in the corner there, which is really kind of speaking to sampling and bias, is a great illustration for how if you ask the right question to the right people, you can make results say anything you want that might not actually be true. And that's what you're looking to avoid. All right, so we want to ensure that we have some time for questions. So let's summarize by just acknowledging that people do often think about the work of recruiting participants and gathering data and analyzing the data as sort of the biggest parts of a study. But we don't want to underemphasize the importance of exploring past research, of formulating appropriate research questions, and then choosing and aligning research design and methods that match the question and lead to the results that you're looking to generate. Don't overlook or underestimate the time and the care that's really needed in this part of a study's design. We can't overemphasize enough the importance of forming partnerships and collaborating to build the research team that you'll need that has the expertise for the study you're proposing. And then just remember that the process is cyclical, it is iterative within a field and really between related fields that might inform the work. But ultimately, it is aligned questions, design, and methods that yield the important findings, the credibility, the visibility in the field, and the advancement as a researcher that we want all of you, of course, to have as we desire for ourselves as well. So with that, we just want to share, we won't talk to them. We've done some of that as we've gone through, but there is a resources slide with clickable links that you'll be able to access from the QEM Resource Hub. And then on the next slide, I believe it was Naomi who previewed the next few webinars in this series, but you'll see there that in June and July, this team will be looking more at mixed methods research design. Actually, no, that is July and August, mixed methods research designs. The next webinar in June is going to be looking specifically at methods for conducting research with community, with a special focus on the 3 that you see listed there. So if you are interested, please do go to the QEM page, which is QR coded on the next slide for you. A few different QR codes there where you can link to the events page to get a sense of upcoming webinars and register for those, as well as getting a sense of who the fellows are, where our areas of expertise and geographical locations of assignment are. And you can feel free to reach out to any one of us who might be able to help as you're planning studies and looking at different designs or methodologies. That that QR code will link you there so that we can help. And then lastly, if you wouldn't mind providing us feedback with the link at the bottom the QR code at the bottom takes you to a link where you can provide feedback. We would love to have your thoughts about this webinar and other topics that you'd like to see covered. We have added one session to the webinar series in response to your feedback. So we welcome that. And thank you in advance for it. So with that, Christine, I'm going to hand it back over to you to field questions, and we'll also be looking to the chat and Q&A tab to see if there are any.
Thank you so much for an engaging and informative presentation. We welcome questions at this point. We have about 6 minutes. To ask a question, you can use the chat, you can use the Q&A box, or you can raise your hand, come off mute.
We assume that the presentation was just so great and so comprehensive that we've left no space for questions.
We
Oh,
have
I
a
do see
request.
requests for the QR code. Yep. Go ahead, Christine.
I was just going to say, will you pull that slide back up with the QR codes? And we have a raised hand as well. Liz Godwin, talking is permitted. You may ask your question.
Thank you. Liz Godwin from the University of New Mexico. I had a question, kind of moving back towards the beginning of the presentation where we differentiated between a research question and a hypothesis. When you're like writing a proposed research study, is it appropriate to have both in there, or is it, because it kind of seemed like the research question was definitely the way to go, but do you also want to pose a hypothesis in there, or is that something that I think you develop as you get involved into the study? Could you provide some insight to that, please?
Anybody want to go first? I can
Toya.
just start by saying it really is discipline specific. So what I would say to you as an engineer can sound very different than what Tony or Naomi might say from the perspective of their psychology background, and what Toya might say as sort of as a mathematician and researcher in STEM education spaces. So I don't want you to think that there is one answer to that question, but we'll certainly try to provide a few.
Yeah. Um, just going like thinking back to the slides, go to the previous slide. I think it was the table that had the two. I think there are cases where you only, so I would say I see a lot of qualitative researchers, like solely qualitative work, lean into research questions, where I find that quantitative and from my experience, mixed methods, when I have put proposals forth and have read a lot of proposals in my former position, I tend to use both. So the research questions sort of shape the project, and then um, at the next level, you have the hypotheses that are written to be testable with respect to the research questions. So I think there are cases where you can have either, and there are cases where you can have both.
I think this is an excellent alignment moment too. While it might differ by your field, I think it is difficult to propose a quantitative study that does not include your hypotheses, right? So I think knowing, and I think that would be similar with mixed methods, although you might be able to get away with it more. But the research question is kind of the guiding light, as Toya was saying. And if you're doing quantitative studies, you're wanting to answer a very specific question that you're predicting, and that's your hypothesis. And if you don't have that included in a proposal, it can look as though you don't know what the prior research is to inform that prediction. So, excellent question. Really good question.
In the absence of other questions, can I just ask Liz, does that help? Liz, if you're answering your,
Yes.
oh, there you are.
Yeah, I think that helps a little bit of clarification. Um, it seems like it's definitely discipline specific, um, but you definitely want to consider both of those when you're writing a proposal, I think is what my takeaway is.
Definitely so. And my saying that as an on the quantitative side, as Tony mentioned, you'd never really submit a proposal or do a study without the hypotheses. We call the question something different. And so while you certainly have questions you're looking to explore, previously they weren't necessarily titled research questions in a purely quantitative space, but that was the only discipline specific kind of reference. Of course, you will still have questions. It's just a matter of how they're referred to. All right, Christine, I think we are officially out of time, so I am passing it back to you.
And I just want to thank everyone for attending our webinar today and rounding out our May series. This wonderful series on research capacity building, which will continue for the rest of the year with these 4 wonderful presenters. And as our presenters noted, QR codes take you to various places on the QEM website. So the QEM events page to sign up for future webinars, the Heroes webpage where you can connect with our Heroes Fellows, and the webinar feedback form where you provide valuable feedback about our webinars that we incorporate into future webinars. Thank you so much for attending today, and we wish you a great afternoon.